The thunder of hooves echoed through the canyon as Genevieve Ashford urged her exhausted mare forward, the distant shouts of her pursuers growing closer with each passing moment. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, staining her once pristine blouse crimson, as the unforgiving sun beat down on the parched California landscape of 1875. She had been riding for 2 days straight, fleeing a past that refused to release its grip on her future. And now her strength was failing just as the silhouette of Red Bluff appeared on the horizon, her last hope for salvation in a world that had shown her little mercy. Dust swirled around Genevieve as she finally reached the outskirts of Red Bluff. Her horse, lathered with sweat, stumbled beneath her. She knew the poor creature couldn't go much further. The town appeared modest but welcoming, a collection of wooden buildings lining the main street with the Sacramento River flowing nearby. People moved about their business, unaware of the desperate woman arriving at their doorstep. Genevieve slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. She clutched the saddle horn for support, fighting to remain conscious. Her long auburn hair had escaped its pins, falling around her dirt-streaked face in tangled waves. She wore men's trousers beneath a torn skirt, practical attire for her desperate flight, but sure to raise eyebrows in a proper town. "Whoa there, miss. You look like you've been through hell itself." The deep voice startled her. Genevieve spun around, nearly losing her balance as she faced a tall man with broad shoulders and kind blue eyes. His dark blonde hair was tousled by the breeze, and he wore a simple cotton shirt with suspenders and work-worn trousers. No gun belt marked him as a lawman, but something in his steady gaze suggested reliability. "I need." Her voice cracked from thirst. "I need somewhere to hide." The man frowned, concern evident in his expression. "Name's Daniel Quinn. I run the livery at the edge of town." "Whatever trouble you're in, you'll need water and rest first." Genevieve fought the urge to run. She'd learned the hard way that men's kindness often came with steep prices, but her mare needed care, and she was at the end of her strength. "Genevieve," she managed, deciding to withhold her surname. "Thank you." Daniel nodded, carefully taking the reins of her horse. "Let's get you both seen to. My place is just down the road." As they walked, Genevieve felt the curious stares of townspeople. A woman in her disheveled state drew attention, the very thing she'd hoped to avoid. She pulled her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders and kept her head down. Daniel's livery stable was a large, well-kept building with an attached living quarters. He guided her horse into a stall and immediately began unsaddling the exhausted animal. "She's a fine mare," he commented, running gentle hands over the horse's flanks. "Pushed hard, though." "I had no choice," Genevieve whispered, leaning against the stable wall for support. Daniel glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "There's water in the barrel there and a dipper. Help yourself while I tend to your horse." Genevieve practically stumbled to the water barrel, drinking deeply before splashing some on her face. The cool liquid revived her somewhat, washing away dirt and a small amount of the dried blood. "You're hurt," Daniel observed, approaching with a clean cloth in hand. "Here." She accepted the cloth cautiously. "It's nothing serious. Mind telling me what brings a lady like yourself to Red Bluff in such a state?" "People tend to notice newcomers here, especially ones who look like they're running from something." Genevieve stiffened. "I'm just passing through." Daniel's lips quirked slightly. "With all due respect, miss, you don't look in any condition to be passing through anywhere. You need rest, food, and probably a doctor for that cut." "No doctors," she said sharply. "No one who might. I can't be found." Something in her tone must have conveyed her desperation because Daniel's expression softened. "All right, no doctors for now." but I insist you at least sit down before you fall down." He led her to his modest quarters attached to the livery, a small but clean space with simple furnishings. Genevieve sank gratefully onto a wooden chair, her legs finally giving out. "I'll fix you something to eat," Daniel said, moving to a small stove in the corner. "Then you can tell me as much or as little as you want." As Daniel prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Genevieve's mind raced. She couldn't stay long. The men pursuing her would eventually track her to Red Bluff, but she needed time to recover to plan her next move. "Here." Daniel set a plate before her. "It's nothing fancy, but it's hot." Genevieve couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. She murmured thanks and began to eat, trying to pace herself despite her hunger. "So," Daniel said, sitting across from her with his own plate, "what brings you to our little corner of California?" Genevieve set down her spoon, weighing how much to reveal. "I'm running from men who want to harm me." "That's all I can say." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "Husband, no," she replied, her voice bitter. "Nothing like that." "The law," she hesitated, then shook her head. "Not exactly. It's complicated." Daniel nodded slowly. "Most things worth running from are." "I won't pry, but you should know that Sheriff Hayes is a good man. If you're in genuine trouble, he might help." Genevieve gave a hollow laugh. "I've yet to meet a lawman who'd take a woman's word over a man's, especially men with money and influence." "Hayes might surprise you," Daniel said quietly, "but that's for you to decide." He stood, gathering their empty plates. "You're welcome to rest here today. I've got a small back room with a cot. It's not much, but it's private." Suspicion flared in Genevieve's mind. "And what do you want in return?" Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "Nothing. Contrary to what you might believe, Miss Genevieve, not every man expects payment for basic human decency." Shame washed over her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." His face softened. "You didn't. I can see you've had reason to be cautious. Rest now. We'll figure out the next steps when you're stronger." The small back room was simple but clean, with a narrow cot and a small window overlooking the stable yard. Genevieve sank onto the cot, exhaustion overwhelming her despite her wariness. Within moments, she drifted into a troubled sleep. She woke to the sound of voices, Daniel's deep tones and another man's sharper cadence. Instantly alert, Genevieve crept to the door and listened. "Just asking if you've seen a woman, Quinn. Auburn hair, green eyes, probably traveling alone. Might be injured." "What she wanted for?" Daniel asked, his voice neutral. "That's none of your concern," the stranger replied. "My employer merely wishes to locate his ward. She's unwell, confused, prone to making up stories. For her own safety, she needs to be returned to her family." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Daniel said flatly. "If I do, I'll let Sheriff Hayes know." "You do that," the man replied, irritation evident in his tone. "And keep your eyes open. There's a reward for information leading to her recovery." Genevieve's heart pounded as she heard footsteps retreating. Moments later, Daniel knocked softly on her door. "You heard?" he asked when she opened it. She nodded, her face pale. "They found me faster than I expected." "Who are they?" Daniel asked. "And don't tell me it's complicated." "If I'm harboring you, I deserve to know why men are searching for you." Genevieve sank back onto the cot, her shoulders slumping. "His name is Victor Harrington. He married my mother after my father died 3 years ago. When she passed away last winter, I discovered he'd been poisoning her slowly to gain control of my father's mining investments." Daniel's eyes widened. "That's a serious accusation." "I have proof, my mother's diary, documenting her symptoms, and letters from Victor to his associates discussing their plans. But when I confronted him, he declared me mentally unstable. He's powerful in Sacramento, friends with judges, newspaper editors. No one would believe me." Her voice broke. He had me committed to an asylum, said I was suffering from female hysteria. Daniel's jaw tightened. How did you escape? One of the nurses believed me. She helped me get out 2 weeks ago. Genevieve's hands trembled. Victor's men have been pursuing me ever since. If they catch me, they'll take me back to that horrible place or worse. Victor can't risk me telling the truth about him. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, processing her story. You need to speak with Sheriff Hayes. No, panic flared in her eyes. Please, I can't risk it. Victor could have telegraphed ahead to law enforcement all over California. For all I know, your sheriff already has orders to detain me. Hayes isn't the type to blindly follow orders without hearing both sides, Daniel argued. And you can't keep running forever, Genevieve. She stood suddenly. I've imposed on your kindness too long. I should go. Daniel stepped forward, blocking her path. You're exhausted, injured, and those men are still in town. Running now would be suicide. Their gazes locked in silent battle. Finally, Genevieve's shoulders sagged. One more night. Then I'll move on at dawn. Daniel nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't satisfied with her decision. I need to return to work. There are customers waiting. Please stay inside and rest. After he left, Genevieve paced the small room, anxiety churning in her stomach. Despite Daniel's kindness, she couldn't afford to trust anyone completely. She'd learned that lesson painfully over the past year. As the afternoon wore on, Genevieve cleaned her wound and washed her face and hands with water from a basin Daniel had provided. She finger-combed her tangled hair, wishing for a proper bath and clean clothes. Her current state would make her conspicuous wherever she went. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. These were different from Daniel's steady tread, heavier, more deliberate. Genevieve pressed herself against the wall beside the door, heart hammering. Quinn, you in here? A deep voice called out. Back with a customer, Sheriff, came Daniel's reply from the stables. Need something, Sheriff? Genevieve bit back a gasp. Had Daniel betrayed her after all? Just making my rounds. Heard there might be strangers in town asking questions. Yeah, some fancy-dressed fellow looking for a woman. Said she was his employer's ward. The footsteps came closer to her door. Genevieve glanced desperately at the small window, wondering if she could fit through it. And have you seen such a woman? The sheriff asked, his voice now just outside her room. There was a pause before Daniel answered. Can't say that I have, Sheriff, but if I do, you'll be the first to know. The silence that followed was deafening. Genevieve held her breath, certain the sheriff could hear her pounding heart. All right then, the lawman finally said. Just keep your eyes open. These men seem mighty determined to find this woman. Makes me wonder what she did or what they did. I'll let you know if I hear anything, Daniel replied. The heavy footsteps retreated and Genevieve released her breath in a shaky exhale. Minutes later, Daniel appeared at her door. You lied to him, she whispered, disbelief in her voice. Daniel's expression was unreadable. I bought you time, that's all, but Sheriff Hayes isn't a fool. If those men stay in town asking questions, he'll eventually put it together. Why did you do that? You don't know me. I know enough to see you're terrified and not without reason. He leaned against the doorframe. But this can't last, Genevieve. You need a better plan than running. She sank onto the cot. I just need to reach my father's old partner in Oregon. He'll believe me, help me prove what Victor did. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Oregon's a long journey for someone being hunted. You'll need supplies, a fresh horse, perhaps a disguise. Hope flickered in her chest. You'd help me with that? I didn't say that, he replied, though his eyes suggested otherwise. Get some more rest. We'll talk again after dinner. As the day faded into evening, Genevieve found herself surprisingly comfortable in Daniel's humble quarters. He brought her a simple dinner of stew and bread, along with the surprising luxury of a pot of coffee. "Thank you," she said softly as they ate, "for everything." Daniel shrugged, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Genevieve contradicted him. "Most wouldn't have. Most would have turned me in for the reward or, worse." He studied her over his coffee cup. "You've had a rough time of it, haven't you?" "Even before your mother's death." Genevieve stared into her own cup. "Life hasn't been particularly kind, no." "Tell me about your father," Daniel suggested. "You mentioned he had mining investments. He owned several silver claims near Virginia City. When he died, my mother inherited everything. She wasn't equipped to manage such business affairs. My father had always protected her from those concerns." Genevieve's voice hardened. Victor appeared like a savior, offering to help her navigate the business world. She was vulnerable, lonely. They married within 6 months, and he began poisoning her after securing control of the assets, Daniel concluded. Genevieve nodded. "It was slow at first, just occasional illness. But after a year, she was bedridden. The doctors called it a wasting disease. Only I suspected differently, especially after finding letters in Victor's desk. You took a risk confronting him directly." "I was naive," she admitted bitterly. "I thought truth would be enough. I didn't understand the depths of his cruelty until I found myself locked in that asylum, told repeatedly that my accusations were delusions." Daniel's expression darkened. "No one deserves such treatment. The worst part is knowing he's still out there, living in my family's home, spending my father's money." Genevieve set down her cup with trembling hands. Sometimes I think a loud knock interrupted her words. They both froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Quinn, open up. Sheriff's business." Daniel stood quickly. "Stay here," he whispered to Genevieve before moving to answer the door. She heard the door open, followed by Sheriff Hayes's authoritative voice. "Evening, Quinn. Mind if I come in?" "It's late, Sheriff. Something urgent, you could say that." Heavy boots crossed the threshold. "Those men asking about the missing woman. They've filed a formal complaint. Say they have reason to believe you're harboring her." Genevieve's blood ran cold. She looked frantically around the small room for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "That right?" Daniel replied, his voice remarkably steady. "And what makes them think that? Stable boy from the hotel saw you leading a tired horse with a woman yesterday morning. Said she looked injured." "Tommy's got quite an imagination," Daniel said with a forced laugh. "I was helping Mrs. Finch's daughter with her mare. Animal pulled up lame outside town." "That's interesting," the sheriff said slowly, "considering Mrs. Finch's daughter is visiting relatives in San Francisco." Silence fell. Genevieve pressed a hand to her mouth, certain everything was lost. "I think you'd better tell me what's really going on, Quinn," Sheriff Hayes continued. "And don't insult me with more lies." Genevieve couldn't bear to let Daniel face consequences for her sake. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into the main room. Both men turned to her. Sheriff Hayes was a tall, imposing figure with iron gray hair and sharp eyes beneath bushy brows. His hand instinctively moved to rest on his holstered revolver. "Miss," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I believe some gentlemen in town are looking for you." "Sheriff Hayes," Genevieve began, her voice steadier than she felt. "My name is Genevieve Ashford. Whatever those men have told you about me is a lie." The sheriff's weathered face remained impassive. "They say you're mentally unsound, escaped from proper care. That your stepfather is concerned for your welfare. My stepfather, Victor Harrington, murdered my mother and had me committed to hide his crime," she stated bluntly. "I have proof, or I did before I had to flee. The documents are hidden at my family home in Sacramento." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Ashford. It's the truth, she insisted. I've been running for 2 weeks. Mr. Quinn only offered me shelter for the night out of kindness. He knows nothing about me. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then turned to Daniel. You believe her story, Quinn? Daniel straightened his shoulders. I do, Sheriff. She's exhausted, injured, and terrified, but she's not crazy. I'd stake my reputation on it. Hayes rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Harrington. I've heard that name. Wealthy man, political connections in Sacramento. Not someone to cross without solid evidence. I understand if you need to take me in, Genevieve said quietly. But please don't hand me over to Victor's men. They'll kill me before I ever reach Sacramento. The sheriff paced the small room, clearly weighing his options. I don't make a habit of turning women over to men who make me uneasy, Miss Ashford. And those fellows at the hotel don't sit right with me too eager for a simple retrieval of a family member. Hope flickered in Genevieve's chest. Then you believe me. I didn't say that, Hayes replied. But I'm not dismissing your claims either. For now, you'll stay at my office where I can keep an eye on you while I send some telegrams to verify parts of your story. Daniel stepped forward. She can stay here, Sheriff. I'll take responsibility for her. Hayes gave him a measured look. You willing to stake more than your reputation on this woman, Quinn? Because harboring a fugitive, even if she turns out to be innocent, could cost you your business, maybe your freedom. Without hesitation, Daniel nodded. I am, the sheriff sighed. Your father would be proud of your principles, son, but sometimes I think you got more courage than sense. He turned back to Genevieve. I'll need a formal statement from you, Miss Ashford, and I'll want details, names, dates, anything that can be verified. Of course, she agreed, relief washing over her. Don't celebrate yet, Hayes warned. Those men are still in town and they won't take kindly to being stalled. I'll tell them you're in protective custody while I investigate, but they're likely to telegraph their employer. Things could get complicated. Daniel moved to stand beside Genevieve. We understand, Sheriff, Hayes nodded grimly. I'll expect you both at my office first thing tomorrow. For tonight, Quinn, keep your doors locked and your shotgun handy. He tipped his hat. Good evening to you both. After the sheriff departed, Genevieve sank onto a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. I can't believe he didn't arrest me on the spot. Daniel smiled faintly. Hayes is many things, but he's no one's puppet. He'll investigate thoroughly before making any decision. Victor has powerful friends, she warned. Even a good man like your sheriff might find himself pressured to comply with official orders. Perhaps, Daniel acknowledged, but you've bought yourself time and that's valuable. He hesitated, then added, I meant what I said to Hayes. I believe you, Genevieve. She looked up at him, studying his earnest face. Why, you barely know me, Daniel's expression softened. Sometimes you just know when someone's telling the truth. My father taught me to trust my instincts about people. They're rarely wrong. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Daniel replied with a hint of sadness. He died in the war Antietam. I was just a boy. Genevieve's heart ached for him. I'm sorry, it seems we've both lost too much. Daniel moved to stoke the small fire in the hearth. Get some rest, Genevieve. Tomorrow will be challenging enough. She rose, then paused. Daniel, thank you for standing up for me. Not many would have. He merely nodded, but the warmth in his blue eyes spoke volumes. Dawn broke with a gentle rain pattering against the roof. Genevieve had slept better than expected, despite her anxiety about the day ahead. She found Daniel already awake, cooking breakfast over the small stove. Morning, he greeted her. There's hot water in the basin if you'd like to wash up. And I found some of my sister's old clothes that might fit you. She left them when she moved to San Francisco with her husband last year. Genevieve accepted the bundle gratefully. You have family nearby. Just Mary in San Francisco, he replied, turning bacon in a skillet. Our mother passed when we were young. Father raised us until the war. After he died, I came west. Mary joined me a few years later. You've been in Red Bluff long, Daniel nodded. 7 years now. Worked for the previous livery owner until he retired 3 years ago. Been mine ever since. The simple cotton dress Daniel provided was modest and slightly too large, but clean and far more presentable than Genevieve's tattered clothing. After washing and changing, she felt almost human again. "You look better," Daniel commented when she emerged, setting plates of bacon and eggs on the small table. "How's your head wound?" "Healing," she replied, touching the cut gingerly. "Thank you for the clothes. I'll find a way to repay your sister somehow." They ate quickly, both aware of the impending meeting with Sheriff Hayes. As they prepared to leave, Daniel handed Genevieve a worn shawl. "It was Mary's too," he explained. "The rain's let up, but there's still a chill in the air." The gesture touched her deeply. Such simple kindness had been absent from her life for so long that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Red Bluff was coming to life as they walked toward the sheriff's office. Shopkeepers opening their doors and wagons rumbling down the muddy street. Genevieve kept her head down, acutely aware of curious glances directed their way. Sheriff Hayes was waiting for them, his office sparsely furnished but meticulously organized. A pot of coffee steamed on a small stove in the corner. "Miss Ashford, Mr. Quinn," he greeted them with a nod. "Close the door behind you." Once they were seated, Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying Genevieve carefully. "I sent some telegrams last night, got responses to most this morning." Genevieve twisted her hands in her lap, anxiety building. "And there is indeed a Victor Harrington of Sacramento who married the widow Elizabeth Ashford 3 years ago. She died this past winter officially of consumption." Hayes picked up a sheet of paper. "There is also a sanatorium outside Sacramento that confirms Genevieve Ashford was a patient who escaped 2 weeks ago. They describe her as delusional and dangerous." Daniel's hand moved to cover Genevieve's clenched fist. "That doesn't mean," Hayes held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I also contacted an old Army friend who now serves as a deputy in Sacramento. He tells me there have been whispers about Harrington's sudden prosperity and about the convenient deaths of not one but 2 wealthy wives before your mother." Genevieve gasped. "2 others? I didn't know." "My friend couldn't provide details, but he confirmed that Harrington is well connected and virtually untouchable in Sacramento society." Hayes fixed Genevieve with a penetrating stare. "Now, Miss Ashford, I need you to tell me exactly what evidence you have against your stepfather." Drawing a deep breath, Genevieve recounted everything: her mother's gradual decline, the suspicious behavior of Victor's personal physician, the incriminating letters she discovered, and finally, her confrontation with Victor that led to her committal. "The letters and my mother's diary are hidden in a compartment beneath a floorboard in my old bedroom," she concluded. "Victor doesn't know about it. It was a secret space my father built for me when I was a child." Hayes listened intently, occasionally making notes. "And the nurse who helped you escape, could she corroborate your story?" Genevieve's face fell. "I don't know. She risked everything to help me. She may have been dismissed or worse when my absence was discovered." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Harrington's men are still at the hotel. They're demanding I turn you over to them today. They've presented papers signed by a Sacramento judge authorizing your return to the sanatorium." Daniel straightened in his chair. "You can't possibly." "I haven't decided what to do yet," Hayes interrupted. "On one hand, I have official documents from a judge. On the other, I have a woman's story that, while disturbing, makes a certain kind of sense." "Sheriff," Daniel said earnestly, You've known me for 7 years. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my judgment? No, Hayes admitted. Then believe me when I tell you Genevieve is telling the truth. I'd stake my life on it. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. Strong words, Quinn. I mean them, Daniel replied firmly. I trust her completely. Hayes studied them both for a long moment. Very well. Miss Ashford, I'm inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt for now. But we need that evidence if we're going to stand against someone with Harrington's influence. Hope blossomed in Genevieve's chest. You believe me? Let's say I believe there's more to this story than a delusional young woman running from proper care, Hayes replied carefully. The question is, how do we proceed? Those men won't leave without you, and I can only stall them so long. Daniel leaned forward. What if we could retrieve the evidence from Sacramento? Hayes shook his head. Too risky. Harrington would be watching for any attempt to access the house. Then we need to draw him out, Genevieve suggested suddenly. Away from Sacramento, away from his protection. Both men turned to her with questioning looks. If Victor believes I've been captured, he might come himself to ensure I'm dealt with properly. He wouldn't trust such an important task to hired men. Her voice hardened. His pride wouldn't allow it. Hayes stroked his mustache thoughtfully. That's a dangerous gamble, Miss Ashford. My entire life is a dangerous gamble at this point, Sheriff, she replied. But if we could lure Victor here, away from his powerful friends and on your territory, we might stand a chance. Daniel looked concerned. You'd be putting yourself at risk as bait. I'm already at risk, Genevieve countered. At least this way I'd have some control over the situation. Hayes considered the idea. It could work. I could telegraph that we have the young woman in custody, but that her story has raised concerns that require Mr. Harrington's personal attention. He'll come, Genevieve said with certainty. He can't risk anyone believing me, even temporarily. And when he arrives? Daniel asked. Hayes's expression hardened. We watch him carefully. Men like Harrington get careless when they think they've won. He might say or do something that reveals his true nature. It's not enough, Genevieve argued. We need the documents from the house. One problem at a time, Miss Ashford, Hayes advised. First, let's deal with the men currently demanding your return. I'll tell them you're being held pending investigation and that I've summoned Harrington to Red Bluff. As they discussed the details of their plan, Genevieve felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. For the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't facing her battles alone. The sheriff's strategy worked better than expected. When informed that the local authorities were holding Genevieve pending a full investigation, Victor's men reacted with barely concealed anger but could do little in the face of Hayes's authority. They dispatched an immediate telegram to Sacramento, just as Hayes had predicted. Now we wait, the sheriff said after reporting back to Daniel and Genevieve. Harrington will either send more men or come himself. Either way, we need to keep Miss Ashford somewhere safe, somewhere other than the jail or Quinn's place, which they're watching. Where do you suggest? Daniel asked. Hayes considered for a moment. Mrs. Donovan's boarding house. She's discreet, and her place is on the other side of town. I'll speak to her personally. By nightfall, Genevieve was settled in a small but comfortable room at the widow Donovan's establishment. The older woman asked no questions beyond what Hayes shared, simply showing Genevieve to her room with a sympathetic pat on the arm. You rest easy, dear, Mrs. Donovan said. No one bothers my boarders without going through me first. Left alone, Genevieve sat on the edge of the bed, emotions warring within her. The events of the past days, meeting Daniel, confronting Sheriff Hayes, setting their trap for Victor, had happened so quickly she'd barely had time to process them. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Daniel standing there, hat in hand. "Sheriff asked me to check on you," he explained, "and to bring you this." He handed her a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Genevieve found a simple nightgown and a hairbrush. "Mrs. Donovan's contribution," Daniel added with a small smile. "She thought you might need them. Please thank her for me," Genevieve said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "And thank you for coming." Daniel shifted slightly. "Actually, there's something else." Sheriff Hayes received another telegram from Sacramento. Victor Harrington will arrive on tomorrow's afternoon train. Genevieve's heart raced. So soon? He seemed eager to resolve the situation personally, Daniel replied grimly. Hayes will meet his train and bring him directly to the sheriff's office. You'll be brought there only after Hayes has spoken with him. I should be afraid, Genevieve admitted, but mostly I'm relieved this might finally end. Daniel studied her with concern. It's still dangerous, Genevieve. Harrington won't surrender easily even if he's cornered. I know. She met his gaze steadily. But for the first time, I feel like I might actually win this fight, thanks to you and Sheriff Hayes. Daniel reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it, dropping his hand. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. After he left, Genevieve found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Knowing Victor would soon be in the same town, possibly in the same room as her, sent cold waves of fear through her body. She'd escaped his clutches once. Would she be strong enough to face him again? Morning brought rain again, heavier than the previous day. Genevieve watched droplets stream down her window, trying to calm her nerves. Mrs. Donovan had brought breakfast and a cup of strong tea, but Genevieve could barely eat. Around noon, a carriage arrived at the boarding house. Sheriff Hayes himself escorted Genevieve to his office, keeping her concealed beneath an oversized rain slicker. Harrington's train arrives in less than an hour, Hayes informed her as they entered through the office's back door. You'll wait in the adjoining room until I call for you. Listen carefully to everything he says, but don't make a sound. Daniel was already waiting inside, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. His face brightened slightly when he saw Genevieve. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She nodded, though her trembling hands betrayed her anxiety. I will be, once this is over. Hayes positioned Genevieve in the small room that normally served as his private quarters. Through the thin wall, she could hear everything in the main office. Remember, Hayes told her before closing the door, no matter what he says, let me handle it. Don't show yourself until I call for you. The wait seemed interminable. Genevieve paced the small room, startling at every sound from outside. Finally, she heard the front door of the sheriff's office open, followed by voices, Hayes's familiar rumble and another cultured tone that sent ice through her veins. Victor had arrived. Sheriff Hayes, I appreciate your diligence in this difficult matter, Victor said smoothly. My stepdaughter's condition has caused our family considerable distress. I understand, Mr. Harrington, Hayes replied neutrally. Though I must say, the young woman in my custody seems remarkably coherent for someone described as delusional. Ah, yes. Victor's voice took on a regretful quality. Genevieve's particular affliction is characterized by periods of perfect lucidity interspersed with dangerous paranoid episodes. It's quite tragic, really. Her mother's death affected her deeply, too deeply for her fragile mind. I see, Hayes said. And these accusations she's made against you, about her mother's death, Victor sighed audibly. Part of her delusion, I'm afraid. The poor girl couldn't accept that her mother died of natural causes, despite the best medical care money could provide. She constructed this elaborate fantasy that I somehow poisoned Elizabeth. He lowered his voice. The doctors say it's a manifestation of her grief blaming me. allows her to process the loss. Genevieve clenched her fists, fury rising at Victor's practiced performance. How many times had he recited this fiction to keep her silenced? "That's quite a serious delusion," Hayes commented. "One might expect some evidence of such claims." "Precisely why it's so troubling," Victor replied. "Genevieve is extremely intelligent. Her fabrications are detailed and consistent. She's even convinced a nurse at the sanatorium to assist in her escape, a vulnerable young woman easily manipulated by Genevieve's persuasive stories." "I see," Hayes said again. "And this nurse, where is she now?" There was a slight pause before Victor answered. "She's been dismissed, naturally. One can't have staff who release dangerous patients." "Just dismissed," Hayes pressed. "Not charged with any crime." "I'm a compassionate man, Sheriff," Victor replied smoothly. "The nurse was young and foolish, but not malicious. I saw no need to ruin her life over one mistake. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to see my stepdaughter. The doctors are concerned about her condition without proper medication." "Of course," Hayes said. "But first, I'm curious about something. You mentioned Genevieve's mother died of natural causes, consumption, according to the records." "A terrible affliction," Victor confirmed. "Elizabeth suffered greatly in her final months." "Interesting," Hayes mused. "Because I've received information suggesting this isn't the first time you've lost a wife to a wasting illness." The silence that followed was deafening. Genevieve held her breath, pressing closer to the wall. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Sheriff," Victor finally said, his tone noticeably cooler. "But yes, I was widowed before I met Elizabeth. My first wife died of pneumonia nearly 7 years ago. It was a matter of public record in Sacramento, hardly relevant to Genevieve's condition." "And what about Clarissa Wilcox?" Hayes asked. "Your wife before that, I believe." Another longer silence. "You've been misinformed," Victor stated flatly. "I was married only once before Elizabeth." "That's odd," Hayes continued conversationally. "Because I have a telegram here from the county clerk in Nevada City that shows you married Clarissa Wilcox in 1864. She died in 1866, another wasting illness. Left you her family's banking interests, as I understand it." "This is outrageous." Victor's voice had lost its cultured calm. "I came here in good faith to retrieve my disturbed stepdaughter, not to be subjected to slanderous accusations." "No accusations, Mr. Harrington," Hayes replied. "Just clarifying facts. It seems Genevieve isn't the only one with an incomplete narrative." "I demand you produce my stepdaughter immediately," Victor snapped. "I have court orders for her return to proper care." "In due time," Hayes said. "But first, I'd like to discuss the nurse who helped Genevieve escape." "Eliza Morton, I believe. My deputy in Sacramento has been unable to locate her." "How should I know where the girl went?" Victor replied irritably. "She was dismissed. Her whereabouts are no concern of mine." "Curious thing," Hayes continued as if Victor hadn't spoken. "Miss Morton's landlady says men came looking for her the night after Genevieve escaped. She hasn't been seen since. The landlady was quite worried." "This is absurd," Victor declared. "You're clearly been influenced by Genevieve's fantasies. I won't stand for it." "One more thing, Mr. Harrington," Hayes said, his tone hardening. "We found something interesting in Genevieve's possession when she arrived in Red Bluff. A letter in your handwriting discussing the unfortunate necessity of silencing your stepdaughter permanently should she continue making troublesome claims." Genevieve's eyes widened. There was no such letter. Hayes was bluffing. But it was a calculated risk that might provoke Victor into revealing his true nature. "That's a forgery," Victor hissed. "Genevieve is quite skilled at mimicking handwriting, another of her disturbing talents." "Perhaps," Hayes agreed. but it's convincing enough that I've sent a copy to Judge Wilson in Sacramento. He seemed quite interested in reviewing it, given your close association with him." "Wilson wouldn't dare move against me," Victor snarled, his facade finally cracking. "I own half the judges in Sacramento." The silence that followed was profound. Genevieve could almost picture Victor realizing his mistake. "Well now," Hayes said quietly, "that's a remarkable statement from a grieving stepfather concerned only with proper care for his disturbed relative." "You're twisting my words," Victor backpedaled desperately. "The stress of this situation, Mr. Harrington," Hayes interrupted. "I think it's time you met my other guest. Daniel, would you show him in?" Genevieve's door opened and Daniel stood there, his expression grim but reassuring. "It's time," he murmured, offering his hand. Taking a deep breath, Genevieve placed her hand in his and stepped into the sheriff's office. Victor Harrington stood frozen, his handsome face contorted with shock and fury. He was exactly as Genevieve remembered, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, his dark hair showing distinguished silver at the temples, his posture radiating authority. "Sheriff Hayes," Daniel said formally, "allow me to introduce not the woman in your custody, but someone who can identify her." Victor's head snapped toward Daniel, confusion evident in his expression. "This is Mr. Daniel Quinn," Hayes explained, "a respected business owner in our community who happened to be in Sacramento last month and met Nurse Morton at a social gathering. She made quite an impression, speaking passionately about injustices in the medical treatment of women." Understanding dawned on Victor's face as he realized the trap. There was no letter, no Genevieve in custody, just a carefully constructed scenario designed to make him reveal himself. "This is absurd," he sputtered, reaching for his hat. "I won't stand for such deception." "Sit down, Mr. Harrington," Hayes commanded, his hand moving to rest on his holstered pistol. "We're not finished." Victor's eyes darted between the three faces watching him. "You have no authority to detain me. I am a respected businessman who just admitted to having judges in his pocket," Hayes finished for him. "Not to mention your interesting reaction to our questions about Nurse Morton's disappearance, a disappearance I never actually confirmed until you revealed your knowledge of it." Color drained from Victor's face. "This proves nothing. It's your word against mine, and who do you think people will believe? A country sheriff or a prominent Sacramento citizen?" "Perhaps neither," Genevieve said, finding her voice at last. "But they might believe this." From within her dress pocket she withdrew a small envelope. "What is that?" Victor demanded, his voice rising. "A letter from my mother," Genevieve replied steadily. "Written days before her death, when you thought she was too weak to leave her bed. She managed to write this and entrust it to our cook to mail to her sister in Boston." She held Victor's gaze. "It details her suspicions about you, the symptoms she recognized from articles about arsenic poisoning, and her fear for my safety after her death." Victor lunged forward suddenly, reaching for the letter, but Daniel stepped between them, easily restraining the older man. "My aunt received this letter after Mother's funeral," Genevieve continued. "She sent it to me in care of my father's former business partner, knowing I might need protection from you. I collected it on my way north after escaping the asylum." "You're lying," Victor snarled. "Elizabeth was too weak to write, too confused from the medications." "The medications you insisted she take?" Genevieve asked pointedly. "The ones that made her symptoms worse instead of better." Hayes stood, his expression severe. "Mr. Harrington, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of murder and conspiracy. You'll be held in Red Bluff until authorities from Sacramento arrive to transfer you to proper jurisdiction." As Daniel and Hayes secured Victor's wrists with handcuffs, The businessman's composed facade completely collapsed. "You'll regret this," he spat at Genevieve. "All of you. My associates won't let this stand." "Take him to the cell," Hayes instructed Daniel before turning to Genevieve. "Is there really a letter?" she nodded, holding out the envelope. "Everything I said was true. My aunt sent it to my father's partner in Oregon, just as I claimed. I was planning to collect it once I reached there safely." Hayes accepted the envelope with a respectful nod. This might not be enough for a conviction on its own, but combined with the Nevada City marriage records and what we now know about Nurse Morton's disappearance, it gives us grounds to investigate thoroughly. Your stepfather's outburst today won't help his case either. Relief washed over Genevieve in dizzying waves. "What happens now?" "I'll telegraph the proper authorities in Sacramento, ones I trust," Hayes explained. "Victor will remain in custody here while they investigate your family home. With any luck, they'll find those documents you mentioned and Nurse Morton hopefully alive." Daniel returned, his face grim. "He's secure, but making threats against everyone from the governor down to the jail cat." "Let him rant," Hayes said dismissively. "Men like Harrington rely on fear and influence. Both diminish considerably from behind bars." He turned to Genevieve. "You should remain at Mrs. Donovan's for now. I'll assign a deputy to keep watch, just in case Victor's men decide to take matters into their own hands." Daniel stepped forward. "If you don't mind, Sheriff, I'd like to escort Miss Ashford back to the boarding house." Hayes's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "I imagine you would, Quinn. Go on, then. I've got telegrams to send." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets muddy but navigable. Daniel offered Genevieve his arm as they walked, mindful of the slippery conditions. "I can hardly believe it's over," she murmured. "After months of fear and running, to have Victor finally facing justice." "It's not entirely over," Daniel cautioned gently. "There will be investigations, likely a trial. Your testimony will be crucial." "I know," she acknowledged. "But for the first time I feel like justice is possible." She glanced up at him. "I couldn't have done this without you, Daniel. Your belief in me when we barely knew each other. I'll never be able to repay that kindness." Daniel's expression softened. "There's nothing to repay. Anyone with decency would have done the same." "No," Genevieve contradicted him with a small smile. "Not anyone. You're different, Daniel Quinn." They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before Daniel spoke again. "What will you do after this? Will you return to Sacramento once it's safe?" The question gave Genevieve pause. She hadn't thought beyond survival for so long that contemplating a future felt strange. "I'm not sure. The house in Sacramento holds painful memories now. Perhaps I'll sell it once my inheritance is restored and start fresh somewhere." "Red Bluff is a good town," Daniel said quietly, not meeting her eyes. "Growing all the time. New businesses opening. Good people." Warmth spread through Genevieve's chest at the implied suggestion. "I've noticed that about Red Bluff. The people especially seem exceptional." They reached Mrs. Donovan's boarding house all too soon. On the porch, Genevieve turned to Daniel. Would you join me for dinner tonight?" "Mrs. Donovan mentioned her dining room is open to guests of boarders." Daniel's smile lit up his entire face. "I'd like that very much." As promised, Sheriff Hayes assigned a deputy to watch Mrs. Donovan's boarding house. The precaution proved wise when, late that night, 2 of Victor's men were apprehended attempting to gain entry through a back window. They were promptly arrested and joined their employer in Red Bluff's jail. Over the following days, telegrams arrived regularly from Sacramento. Victor's home had been searched, and the hidden documents Genevieve described were found exactly where she'd indicated. More damning still, Nurse Eliza Morton was discovered alive but badly injured, held captive in a remote cabin owned by one of Victor's associates. Her testimony, combined with the recovered documents and Elizabeth's letter, created a formidable case against Victor Harrington. Through it all, Daniel remained steadfastly by Genevieve's side. Their dinners at Mrs. Donovan's became a nightly tradition, their conversations extending late into the evening as they learned more about each other. Daniel shared stories of his journey west after the war, his dreams for expanding his business, perhaps breeding horses someday. Genevieve spoke of her childhood, her father's kindness, and her own interrupted plans to study art in San Francisco before her mother's illness. "You could still pursue that," Daniel suggested one evening as they sat in Mrs. Donovan's parlor. "San Francisco isn't so far from Red Bluff." Genevieve smiled at his persistence. "You seem quite determined to keep me in California, Mr. Quinn." A flush crept up Daniel's neck. "I just think you shouldn't abandon your dreams because of what happened." "Perhaps you're right," she agreed softly. "Though my dreams have changed somewhat in recent weeks." Their gazes held for a long moment before Mrs. Donovan bustled in with coffee, breaking the tension with cheerful chatter about town gossip. 2 weeks after Victor's arrest, a contingent of lawmen arrived from Sacramento to transfer him to the capital for trial. Among them was Judge Nathaniel Blackwell, known for his unimpeachable integrity and immunity to bribes or political pressure. "Miss Ashford," the judge greeted Genevieve formally in Sheriff Hayes's office, "I've reviewed the evidence against your stepfather. It presents a compelling case, but your testimony will be essential." "I understand, Your Honor," Genevieve replied. "I'm prepared to tell the truth, no matter how difficult." The judge nodded approvingly. "Good. I should also inform you that I've issued temporary orders freezing Mr. Harrington's assets pending trial. As your mother's legal heir, your inheritance will be restored if he's convicted." "Thank you," Genevieve said sincerely, "though justice for my mother matters more to me than any inheritance." "A commendable sentiment," Judge Blackwell acknowledged. "The trial is scheduled for next month. We'll arrange proper accommodation for you in Sacramento if you're willing to return." Genevieve hesitated, glancing at Daniel, who stood quietly in the corner. "I'll return for the trial, certainly, but afterward." She drew a deep breath. "I may have other plans." That evening, Daniel took Genevieve for a walk along the Sacramento River as the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson. They had spoken little since the meeting with Judge Blackwell, both aware that their time together might soon end. "Will it be difficult?" Daniel finally asked. Returning to Sacramento, Genevieve considered the question. "Yes and no. There are painful memories there, but facing them might help me heal. And seeing Victor brought to justice in the same city where he once thought himself untouchable, there's a certain rightness to that." Daniel nodded, seemingly lost in thought as they continued walking. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her. "Genevieve," he began hesitantly, "I know we've only known each other a short time, but 3 weeks, 4 days, she supplied with a small smile. He returned the smile briefly before his expression grew serious again. "These past weeks have been the most meaningful of my life. When I think about you returning to Sacramento, perhaps never coming back to Red Bluff." "Daniel," Genevieve interrupted softly, placing her hand on his arm. "Ask me. Whatever you want to say, just ask." Taking a deep breath, Daniel took her hands in his. "Would you consider coming back to Red Bluff after the trial, not as a visitor or a woman in hiding, but to stay with me?" Joy bloomed in Genevieve's heart, but she tempered it with caution. "You need to understand, Daniel, my life has been chaos. The trial will be public, difficult. My name might be tarnished no matter the outcome. Are you sure you want that association?" I don't care about any of that, Daniel replied firmly. I care about you, your courage, your integrity, your kindness despite everything you've endured. I think I'm falling in love with you, Genevieve Ashford. Tears sprang to her eyes. Daniel, you don't need to answer now, he added quickly. I know it's sudden. Just promise you'll think about it. Instead of responding with words, Genevieve rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss. Daniel froze for an instant before his arms wrapped around her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with tender intensity. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Genevieve smiled up at him. That's my answer, Daniel Quinn. Yes, I'll come back to Red Bluff. Yes to everything you're asking, even the parts you're too gentlemanly to say aloud just yet. Daniel's laugh was joyous as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. You're sure you won't miss city life, the society and culture of Sacramento? What I want is a home, Genevieve replied simply. A place where I'm trusted and believed. You gave me that, Daniel, from the first moment. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Genevieve would need to return to Sacramento for the trial, which could last several weeks. Daniel insisted on accompanying her, despite the impact on his business. Jenkins can manage the livery, he said firmly when Genevieve protested. You're not facing this alone. Sheriff Hayes, upon hearing their plans, simply nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. About time Quinn found someone who matches his stubborn streak, he commented dryly to Mrs. Donovan, who had taken a grandmotherly interest in the couple's blossoming relationship. The evening before their departure for Sacramento, Daniel invited Genevieve to dinner at Red Bluff's finest restaurant, a modest establishment by Sacramento standards, but considered quite elegant locally. He seemed unusually nervous, adjusting his collar repeatedly and fumbling with his silverware. Is everything all right? Genevieve asked after watching him rearrange his napkin for the third time. You seem distracted. Daniel cleared his throat. I've been thinking about the future, our future, if I'm not being too presumptuous. That doesn't sound presumptuous at all, she replied with a smile. I've been thinking about it too. Taking a deep breath, Daniel reached across the table to take her hand. Genevieve, I know this may seem rushed. We've known each other barely a month. But sometimes when you find the right person, time becomes irrelevant. Her heart quickened as she realized where the conversation was heading. Daniel. Let me finish before I lose my nerve, he said with a nervous laugh. I love you, Genevieve. Your strength, your kindness, your determination, everything about you. I want to build a life with you, here in Red Bluff or wherever life takes us. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, especially with the trial ahead, but I wanted you to know my intentions. Opening the box, he revealed a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. This was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he left for the war, saying I should save it for when I found a woman as remarkable as she was. His eyes met Genevieve's. I found her. Tears blurred Genevieve's vision as emotion overwhelmed her. After months of fear and uncertainty, after losing her family and nearly her freedom, to find such pure, uncomplicated love seemed almost miraculous. Daniel Quinn, she said, her voice steady despite her tears, I would be honored to become your wife. His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her hand. I should warn you, she added with a watery smile, I have no idea how to be a livery owner's wife. My education covered art and literature, not horse breeding. Daniel laughed. And I know nothing about art, so we're even. We'll learn together. The other diners in the restaurant, who had been watching the scene unfold with poorly disguised interest, broke into spontaneous applause. Daniel blushed furiously while Genevieve laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Later, as they walked back to Mrs. Donovan's boarding house under a canopy of stars, Genevieve marveled at the unexpected turn her life had taken. "A month ago I was hiding in abandoned barns, certain I'd spend the rest of my life running," she mused. And now, Daniel prompted, his arms secure around her waist. She leaned into his embrace, savoring his warmth and strength. "And now I'm planning a future I never dared imagine." "It hardly seems real." "It's real," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And after the trial is over, we'll build that future together, one day at a time." The next morning, they boarded the train to Sacramento, facing the difficult days ahead with the comfort of knowing they would face them together. Sheriff Hayes and Mrs. Donovan came to see them off, the older woman pressing a basket of food into Genevieve's hands with strict instructions to keep up your strength for the trial, dear. As the train pulled away from Red Bluff, Genevieve watched the small town recede from view. For the first time, leaving a place filled her with anticipation rather than dread, because she knew with absolute certainty that she would return not as a fugitive or a visitor, but as a woman coming home. The trial of Victor Harrington became one of the most sensational legal proceedings Sacramento had witnessed in years. The respected businessman stood accused of murdering 2 wives for their fortunes and attempting the same with a third, along with charges of false imprisonment, conspiracy, and attempted murder regarding Genevieve and Nurse Morton. Throughout the grueling weeks of testimony, Daniel never left Genevieve's side. He sat in the courtroom each day, a steadfast presence during her difficult testimony. At night, he escorted her to the modest hotel where they had separate rooms, always ensuring she was safely settled before retiring himself. Victor maintained his innocence, his smooth charm evident even in the courtroom. But the evidence against him mounted inexorably: the recovered documents from Genevieve's hiding place, her mother's letter, Nurse Morton's harrowing testimony, and the damning records from Nevada City, revealing his pattern of marrying wealthy women who subsequently died under suspicious circumstances. The most powerful testimony came from the cook who had posted Elizabeth's final letter. She described in detail how Mrs. Harrington had grown increasingly ill after taking the medications Victor provided, how she had rallied briefly when he was away on business, only to decline rapidly upon his return. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Victor Harrington was sentenced to hang for his crimes. As the verdict was read, Genevieve sat perfectly still, tears streaming silently down her face. Daniel's arm around her shoulders provided the only anchor she needed. "It's over," he whispered as Victor was led away, the once powerful man now diminished in defeat. He can never hurt anyone again. The aftermath of the trial brought both closure and new beginnings. Judge Blackwell expedited the restoration of Elizabeth Ashford's estate to her daughter, including the family home and her father's mining interests. Genevieve immediately made arrangements to sell both, wanting nothing more to do with the wealth that had made her family targets for men like Victor. "Are you certain?" Daniel asked as they walked through the Ashford mansion one last time, the rooms already emptied of personal possessions. "This has been your home for years." Genevieve shook her head. "This house stopped being home the day Victor entered it. The only thing I wanted to save were my parents' portraits and my mother's jewelry." She squeezed his hand. "Home is waiting for us in Red Bluff now." They returned to Red Bluff heroes of a sort, the story of Victor's crimes and Genevieve's courage having spread throughout Northern California. Sheriff Hayes greeted them at the station with the news that Nurse Morton had recovered from her ordeal and accepted a position at a progressive women's hospital in San Francisco. And, Hayes added with a rare smile, I took the liberty of reserving the church for the first Saturday in June, assuming you two weren't planning to wait. Daniel glanced at Genevieve questioningly. They had discussed waiting until her affairs were fully settled, perhaps marrying in the autumn. June sounds perfect, she replied, surprising both men. I see no reason to delay happiness any longer. The wedding of Daniel Quinn and Genevieve Ashford was simple but joyful, attended by what seemed like the entire population of Red Bluff. Mrs. Donovan cried openly throughout the ceremony, while Sheriff Hayes stood as Daniel's best man, looking uncomfortable but proud in his formal attire. Genevieve wore a gown of ivory silk, simple yet elegant, with her mother's pearls around her neck. As she spoke her vows in the sunlit church, she felt the shadows of her past finally recede, replaced by the promise of a future brighter than she dared to hope for. After the ceremony, the town celebrated with a feast in the church hall, followed by dancing that continued well into the night. When the newlyweds finally slipped away, they walked hand in hand to the home Daniel had prepared for them, a cozy house adjacent to the livery, which he had spent weeks renovating with help from friends. It's not a mansion, he said apologetically, as he carried her across the threshold. But I hope it feels like home. Genevieve took in the simple, well-crafted furniture, the vases of wildflowers on every surface, the painting supplies he'd somehow acquired and arranged in the small room he'd designated as her studio. Love for this man who had rescued her in every possible way welled up, leaving her momentarily speechless. It's perfect, she finally managed. Everything I could want. His arms encircled her waist as he drew her close. I plan to spend the rest of my life making you happy, Mrs. Quinn. That's a task already accomplished, she murmured against his lips before their words gave way to more intimate expressions of their love. In the years that followed, Red Bluff watched the Quinn family flourish. Daniel's livery business expanded to include horse breeding, with Genevieve's artistic eye helping select for the most promising bloodlines. Their home grew with the addition of a son in 1877, Thomas, named for Daniel's father, and twin daughters in 1879, Elizabeth and Mary, honoring both their grandmothers. Genevieve found unexpected fulfillment not only in motherhood, but in establishing Red Bluff's first lending library, using a portion of her inheritance to provide books and educational materials for the growing community. She also continued her art, her paintings of the Sacramento Valley landscapes becoming sought-after pieces in galleries as far away as San Francisco. Daniel often marveled at how complete strangers had become family in what seemed like the blink of an eye. I still remember the first time I saw you, he would tell Genevieve, barely able to stand but with such determination in your eyes. I think I started falling in love that very moment. Even covered in dust and blood, she would tease. Especially then, he always replied. That's when I saw your true strength. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Genevieve with a special gift, the deed to a tract of land along the Sacramento River, perfect for building a larger home as their family continued to grow. I thought we might design it together, he suggested as they picnicked on the property, watching their children play along the riverbank. Something with plenty of space for the children and a proper studio for you. Genevieve leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her as she surveyed what would become their new home. It's beautiful, Daniel, but you know, I've been perfectly happy in our little house. He kissed the top of her head. I know, but you deserve a home as exceptional as you are. She turned to face him, cradling his beloved face in her hands. "You know what I think about sometimes? That day in Sheriff Hayes's office when you told him you trusted me completely, a woman you barely knew, with a story that must have sounded impossible." Daniel covered her hands with his own. "I meant every word. Some things you just know in your soul. That trust saved my life," she said softly. "It gave me back everything Victor tried to take from me and so much more I never expected to have." Their life together wasn't without challenges, drought years that threatened the livery business, Genevieve's occasional nightmares about her time in the asylum, the normal trials of raising 3 energetic children. But through it all, the foundation of trust and love they had built proved unshakable. By their 10th anniversary, the Quinns were pillars of the Red Bluff community. Their new riverside home became a gathering place for friends and family, including Sheriff Hayes, who had finally retired and devoted himself to fishing and offering unsolicited advice to his successor, Mrs. Donovan, now in her 80s but still sharp-minded, remained a beloved honorary grandmother to the Quinn children until her peaceful passing in 1887. Nurse Morton visited occasionally from San Francisco, bringing news of her successful career and the progressive changes in women's health care she was helping to implement. One spring evening in 1885, as Daniel and Genevieve sat on their porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard, he took her hand in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question he posed every year on the anniversary of their meeting. Genevieve's answer was always the same, spoken with absolute conviction. "Not a single one. Everything that happened led me here, to you and our children. How could I regret any of it?" Daniel's smile reflected the peace they had both found. "I thank God every day for bringing you to Red Bluff. Even though I arrived with trouble following close behind," she teased. "Especially that," he replied, squeezing her hand. "It gave me the chance to be your hero." Genevieve shook her head, leaning in to kiss him softly. "You have it backward, my love. You think you rescued a damsel in distress, but the truth is simpler. From the moment you said you trusted me, you gave me the strength to rescue myself, and that has made all the difference." As twilight deepened into night, the Quinn family gathered in their home, secure in the love they had built from the most unlikely of beginnings. Outside, Red Bluff settled into evening routines. The town that had once been Genevieve's last desperate hope, now the center of a life more fulfilling than she had ever dared to dream. And in the years that followed, whenever newcomers arrived in Red Bluff with trouble trailing behind them, they would often find themselves directed to the Quinn's door. For in a town with long memories, the story of the desperate woman and the man who believed her had become something of a legend, proof that sometimes, against all odds, trust and love could triumph over even the darkest of circumstances.